As you can see, my good friend Herbie has lost his head, so I don't have to listen to his gibbering all day long anymore, because with his head goes his mouth. And what we're going to be talking about today is the deltoid, or technically called the deltoideus. So obviously it's this muscle here, the delts, or people just sometimes call it the shoulders. But understand the shoulder is a more, how can you say, expansive than just the deltoid. But the deltoid muscle, what's the origins, what's the insertions, what's its actions and what's its function? So first of all, the deltoidus origin, where it starts, it starts on three major areas. One is the spinal scapula, which is just here, that you can feel that at the back here, that little lumpy spine. So this part, the clavicle, parts of this clavicle, as well as that lump on your shoulder, the acromion process. So that is the origin, that's where it starts, which is where it attaches onto the starting point of the scapula and the clavicle and the acromion process. Now from there, it goes down here and it inserts onto the proximal lateral humerus here. So basically what it does, it encapsulates the glenohumeral joint. And there's a very important reason for that. But from an action point of view, the origin, scapula, spinal scapula, clavicle, acromion process, insertion, proximal lateral humerus are oral. So understanding, some people would divide up into the anterior, middle or medial or posterior, anterior, middle, posterior deltoid. But always remember that all of those parts, different alignment of fibers, all insert onto the one point. So no matter which part you think you're working, it all pulls on the same bone. So technically speaking, the whole muscle is always going to be activated through any particular type of movement. So it's not like you can work one without the other. They all work together to all contribute to a moving action. So what is its actions? First of all, it's going to be involved in any shoulder movement whatsoever. So it'll be involved in shoulder flexion, shoulder abduction, shoulder extension, any form of shoulder medial or lateral rotation, abduction, horizontal flexion, horizontal extension, adduction and circumduction. So no matter what the movement is, the deltoid is going to be activated because it attaches to that bone called the humerus. So whenever you move the humerus, the deltoid is going to be working. But obviously it's just going to work in conjunction with other muscles. For example, if I'm going through shoulder flexion like a bench press or horizontal flexion such as the bench press, it's going to be working in conjunction with my pectoralis major. If I'm going to be doing a rowing action where I've got extension or horizontal extension, it's going to be working in conjunction with latissimus dorsi and teres major. So it is what some people call an assistant mover. So it's a smaller muscle that contributes to a moving body part, which is normally driven by the prime mover, whether it be pectoralis major or latissimus dorsi. Now, some people want to target the deltoid, so they will do a movement pattern that takes the deltoid, takes the pectoralis major and latissimus dorsi by doing abduction exercises such as shoulder presses, side raises, front raises and so on. And yes, that's going to work the deltoid, and it's going to work it with, it's not so much a contributing agonist such as your pectoralis major or latissimus dorsi. So it's more, I guess some people would say, a bit more isolation of the deltoid. But don't forget that the deltoid is going to be very highly activated when you're doing a heavy bench press or a seated row or a dip or a chin-up, because it's going to be the weakest link in the movement pattern. So the deltoid is going to get plenty of work in your major compound exercises. And many times you go and do extra deltoid exercises such as shoulder presses and lat raises. All you're doing is you're training a muscle that's already been trained, doing the more compound exercises, and that could also lead to overtraining, particularly the rotator cuff, because the other role of the deltoid is to stabilize the glenohumeral joint. It means to help to keep the head of the humerus in the glenoid cavity. Now the main muscles that do that are the full rotator cuff, which we've already covered before, your supraspinalis, your infraspinalis, your teres minor and your subscapularis, which all originate in your scapula and insert onto the head of the humerus. But that's also assisted by this overlaying muscle called the deltoid. So those two are going to cooperatively work to help stabilize the glenohumeral joint. So whenever you try to do a deltoid exercise or a shoulder exercise, remember you're also doing a rotator cuff exercise. So all those extra shoulder exercises you're doing, all you're really doing is doing extra rotator cuff exercises, particularly when you start to take your arm up here or out to the side in abduction. You're more likely to create impingement of your supraspinatus underneath the acromion process, between the acromion process and the head of the humerus, and that can contribute to later on shoulder impingement, tendonitis and tendinopathy of your supraspinatus. So just be careful that if you're going to do extra deltoid work, which is not recommended because it gets worked in every other or core exercises, but extra deltoid work could lead to extra strain on the rotator cuff, and that would be no cow poo. What do you reckon, Herbie? I got nothing to say.